Hello and welcome to A Genteel Black Hole, the home of my bookish rambles. My name's Ali, and it turns out Cymbeline has nothing to do with the Lion King having one leg shorter than the others. It's Shakestember here on BookTube. That's a month-long celebration of the works of Shakespeare, led by Kelly, Jason, and Nicole. I'll link to all of their channels in the description. As part of Shakestember, all three of them are running read-alongs of plays that they've chosen, and one of Nicole's choices is Cymbeline. Having never read or seen Cymbeline before, I fancied the challenge of reading it. So that's what I've done, and now here I am to talk about it. Great intro, well done. Before I start, I should also mention that Nicole from A Day of Small Things has already posted the first part of her Cymbeline read-along, and I haven't watched it yet because I wanted to go in blind with this play. So I will include a link, and I apologise in advance if any of my talking points overlap with hers. I am looking forward to watching her video. I just wanted to make this one without any outside influence. Now, I've had a copy of Cymbeline sitting on my shelf unread for a long time, so this was the perfect opportunity, the perfect kick up the arse to read it. It was also the perfect opportunity to sort of put myself to the test. If you saw my Shakespeare Journey Tag video from earlier this month, I gave some advice about how to get into Shakespeare, how to approach Shakespeare, that in hindsight I don't think I can back up. I said that the best way to approach Shakespeare was to watch the plays first before you try to read them. But it occurred to me that the last time I read a Shakespeare play before seeing it must have been when we studied it in school. So how can I say that one way is better than the other when I never do it the other way? So, since I had this copy of Cymbeline, I decided to read it before watching the play. I still haven't watched the play. I've actually got a copy on my DVD shelf as well, and I will get around to that at some point. But for now, I'm basing this only on having read the play, which is a new experience for me. And it was a really interesting experience too. This is the copy that I read from the RSC. It's edited by Jonathan Bate and Eric Rasmussen. And as well as the play itself, there's lots of really interesting articles and essays about the history of the play, the performance history, scholarship about it, all that sort of stuff, which I also read. But Cymbeline being one of Shakespeare's least read, least performed plays, before I talk about my own feelings about the play, I will attempt to summarize it for you. If you don't want to know any more about the plot, then I would recommend skipping to the next section, but otherwise, have at it. Cymbeline is one of Shakespeare's last three solo-authored plays, just before The Winter's Tale and finally The Tempest. And it's one of his plays that kind of defies categorization. The first folio of 1623 divided his plays into three categories: comedy, history, and tragedy. And Cymbeline was placed in the tragedy section right at the end. It's the last play in the folio. But it's hard to justify categorizing it as a tragedy because not to give specific spoilers, but it doesn't end that badly. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is Cymbeline about? Well, this is where it gets tricky. The plot of Cymbeline can be roughly divided into three threads. There's the romantic plot with Inogen and Posthumus. There's the succession plot, who will succeed King Cymbeline to the throne. And there's also the war plot, the building tension and eventual war between Rome and Britain. Now, although the Inogen and Posthumus plot is probably the main plot, certainly the plot that gets the most stage time and kind of the most compelling plot, I will briefly summarize the other two plots first. So the war plot concerns the building tensions between Rome and Britain. First things first, Cymbeline is the king of Britain. Caesar Augustus, the emperor of Rome, claims that Cymbeline owes him a tax. However, Cymbeline refuses to pay that tax, and as such, war is threatened and breaks out. So much for the war plot. Now, the succession plot involves Cymbeline's two sons who were kidnapped in infancy. He hasn't seen them since they were babies. He doesn't know if they're still alive. But towards the middle of the play, we discover that the two sons are in fact alive. They've been raised in Wales as farmers by the man that kidnapped them. And if they knew that they were the sons of Cymbeline, then it could be that they, or the elder of them, would ascend to the throne. The other plot element that ties into questions of succession is Cymbeline's wife, the Queen. The Queen is, on the surface, a devoted wife and a loving stepmother to Inogen. However, in secret, she is scheming behind the scenes to try and put her obnoxious son Cloten on the throne. She's planning to poison Cymbeline and have Cloten marry Inogen so that he will become king. And all of these plot threads tie back in to the first one I mentioned, which concerns Inogen and Posthumus. At the start of the play, Inogen, the daughter of Cymbeline, has been imprisoned by Cymbeline. She married against his wishes because, as I mentioned, she was intended to marry the obnoxious Cloten. However, she decided to marry for love and has married Posthumus, who is of humble origins. He was an orphan who was taken in by Cymbeline when he was tragically orphaned as a baby. And he's like very popular in the court. Like, everyone loves him. I mean, Cymbeline loves him too, but simply because Inogen was supposed to marry Cloten, the consequences of that as the play begins is that Inogen is imprisoned and Posthumus is banished. So Posthumus, being banished, goes to Rome. While he's there, he gets into an argument with an Italian called Iachimo over questions of which of their countrywomen is the most honest and faithful. Iachimo makes a wager with Posthumus, betting that he could successfully seduce Inogen. Posthumus, of course, knows that he couldn't possibly do that. So they make the wager, and Iachimo goes to Britain. There, he is introduced to Inogen, and indeed fails to seduce her. However, being determined to win the bet, he gets himself smuggled into her room in a chest, and while she's asleep, in a rather creepy scene, he climbs out of the chest and spies on her in her sleep. He gathers enough evidence to prove that he's been with Inogen. including stealing a bracelet from her wrist and also noting a mole on her body that he surely could only have seen if he had seduced her. He then returns to Rome and presents this evidence to Posthumus, who, being an idiot man in a Shakespeare play, believes all these lies. Posthumus then swears revenge on Inogen for having apparently cheated on him. He sends a note to his faithful manservant Pisanio, who had stayed behind in Britain to serve Inogen, ordering Pisanio to murder Inogen for him. Pisanio naturally refuses to do this, and instead helps Inogen to escape to Wales, where she dresses as a boy and calls herself Fidele. Now, you could be forgiven for having forgotten this already, but Wales is exactly where Cymbeline's two lost sons are living, and it also happens to be where the Roman troops are massing in order to invade England. So all the plot threads get interwoven in a series of unlikely coincidences, and the whole thing comes together in a frantic mess of discoveries and revelations, which lead, surprisingly, to not tragedy, but peace. So, what did I think of Cymbeline? Is it an underappreciated gem, or is it a bit of a mess? Kind of both, really. You could call it a masterpiece. You wouldn't want to, but you could. In much the same way that the complex, possibly convoluted plot is very difficult to untangle, my own feelings about the play are similarly difficult to untangle. I actually really enjoyed the experience of reading it. It's a really strange play, but the more I read of it, and the more I read about it, the more I appreciated its unusual and fairly bold construction. Shakespeare's later plays were often very experimental in their construction, in the way that they were plotted, or the way that they played with conventions of genre or theatre in general. For example, The Tempest, his last solo-authored play, is one of his only plays that observes the classical unities, meaning that it's one of the few plays that is supposed to take place in real time. You know, if it takes 3 hours to perform on stage, it's also supposed to happen in 3 hours in the reality of the play. Shakespeare was often actually criticised in his day for not observing the classical unities, so it's quite interesting that for one of his last plays, he decided to almost sort of prove that he could. It's kind of like the comedian Stuart Lee occasionally deciding to tell a traditional joke with an actual punchline. It's not that he can't do it, it's that he usually chooses not to. On the other end of the spectrum, The Winter's Tale has a huge jump in time of 16 years right in the middle of the play. And this time jump also triggers a complete change of tone and genre of the play, that it stops being an intense psychodrama about jealousy and suddenly becomes a pastoral comedy. So Cymbeline, right before those two plays, the thing that I think Shakespeare was playing with in Cymbeline was just trying to see how convoluted he could make his plot. How many things could he stuff into one play? Cymbeline manages to include an almost absurd number of Shakespeare's favourite plot devices. There's a man driven to jealousy by believing lies about his lover. There's a woman disguising herself as a boy. And there's poison, which actually isn't poison, but some sort of sleeping draught, which simulates death, but only briefly. There's even more that I can't even be bothered to try and list. It almost feels like Shakespeare trying to make a sort of greatest hits play. It's a compilation of all of his favourite bits from his previous plays, just mashed into one. But it doesn't feel... Well, it certainly doesn't feel lazy, because the sheer contrivance of the plot is so intricate and so precise that the more I think about it, the more I realise that it would all fall down if you tried to remove any one of those strands that may at first seem unnecessary, even indulgent. The experience of reading it was a really fascinating one. The way the play builds and builds, adding plot contrivance on top of plot contrivance, it feels almost absurd, but in an absolutely intentional way. I can't imagine what it's like to see it performed. The essays in my RSC copy talk about the performance history and the various approaches that different directors have taken. And one notable aspect of this performance history is just how different directors approach the ending. The final scene is so complex and so convoluted with revelation after revelation that it's possible for an audience to find it more funny than satisfying. But is that maybe what Shakespeare was going for? And is it better to lean into the sheer absurdity of it and kind of revel in it, make it a joyous absurdity, rather than trying to play it completely straight when it's maybe impossible to do that? These are questions I don't have the answer to yet. I've not seen any version of Cymbeline, let alone multiples to compare them. But it's definitely an interesting thing to consider. And for that reason, I found reading it just a fascinating experience. The play itself, I don't know whether I love it that much, and there's not a lot of the dialogue that really sticks in my memory as being particularly interesting, particularly beautiful, with the exception of the funeral speech, "Fear no more the heat of the sun," with which I was already familiar. So yeah, the experience of reading Cymbeline was a really interesting one, really enjoyable, in fact, even if the play itself is not great. So, having sworn just a couple of weeks ago that watching the plays first was the best way to experience them, I am now reconsidering that completely. And I aim to read some more plays that I haven't seen yet. And I might even try to make a video comparing the two approaches. There's still about more than 10 Shakespeare plays that I have neither seen nor read. And so maybe I'll pick a couple and try doing one by reading it first and the other by watching it first, and compare my experience of the two, and try and come to a decision about which way I think is best. But yeah, that's for the future, if I manage it at all. So those were my thoughts on Shakespeare's Cymbeline. And having made this video, I'm now going to go and watch Nicole's as well. So I hope you're having a lovely day. That is about it from me. And I will see you when I see you.